Hello everyone, and welcome back to Crime Whisper. I'm here to keep you company tonight as you drift off to sleep with another eerie case. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, get cozy, close your eyes, and let's dive into tonight's chilling case. Case 1. The mummified corpse in the ventilation shaft in 2006. Inside the long-abandoned basement of an office building in Beijing, a horrifying discovery was made: a dried, withered corpse hidden within a ventilation shaft. The skin was tightly clinging to the bones, the clothes were tattered, and a bra, still clinging to the remains, revealed that the victim was female. The body had taken on a mummified appearance, like something from an American horror film. Shockingly, once the identity of the victim was revealed, the entire city was left stunned. Even more disturbing, the suspects in her murder were brought to court and acquitted. Let's unravel the story of the so-called ventilation mummy, a mystery that stayed hidden for 7 long years. The story begins in July 2006. Management at the Behang building in Beijing decided to convert part of the long-unused second basement into a new parking area. Warehouse manager Mr. Wang was assigned to inspect and clean the space before renovations began. On the morning of July 7th, Mr. Wang descended into the cold, dark basement with a flashlight and cleaning gear. As he ventured deeper into the shadows, he felt a strange chill, as if unseen eyes were watching him. Nervously, he turned around and pointed his flashlight toward a large ventilation fan. That's when he saw it. A strange human-like shape lay just behind the grating. Overcome by a mix of fear and curiosity, Mr. Wang approached and froze. Illuminated by his flashlight was a long-dead, mummified corpse. The sight was so terrifying that Mr. Wang collapsed, trembling, before fumbling for his phone to call the police. Within 30 minutes, officers arrived. Mr. Wang, visibly shaken, described what he had seen. A thin layer of skin clung to bones. The clothes were shredded, and a white bra was still fastened to the body. The victim had a narrow wound above her chest, and dark brown blood clots around it. Dried blood also stained the nearby floor. By 3 p.m., the corpse was removed from the scene, and a forensic investigation was underway. News spread quickly. A mummified woman had been found hidden in the ventilation system of a downtown office building, according to forensic analysis. The victim was a young woman, likely between 18 and 22 years old. She had suffered severe blunt force trauma to her face and head, so much so that she was nearly unrecognizable. There were also indications she had been sexually assaulted. However, due to how long the body had remained hidden, DNA analysis was no longer possible. Despite the decay, investigators noted the woman had manicured nails, painted toenails, and wore fashionable clothing. Near her body was a luxury brand handbag containing cosmetics, but no cash or ID. Inside the bag was something that would become a vital clue: a copy of Beijing Evening News, dated October 6, 1999. This detail helped investigators estimate that her death likely occurred around that time 7 years earlier. It aligned with the building's construction timeline. The location where the body had been hidden, the ventilation shaft, was remote, nearly impossible to access, and had gone unnoticed for years. Powerful fans running through the shaft likely dried the body, naturally mummifying it. The horrifying secret remained hidden until the building's pipelines were being upgraded. By reviewing cold cases from 1999, police connected the remains to a missing persons report filed that same year. The woman's name was Gu Zhu. She was 19, came from a wealthy family, and worked in the very building where her body was found. On the evening of October 7th, 1999, Siyu had dinner with her family. During the meal, she received a call from her workplace, asking her to stop by the office. She said she'd be back shortly. She drove to the underground parking garage at the northwest Beijing railway station right across from the building then known as the Lianfa building. She parked on level B1, exited her car, and began walking the short distance to the staircase that led up to the building, and then she vanished. Her family didn't hear from her that night. Her phone was off. Assuming she had stayed at the office, they waited until the next morning, when she still hadn't returned. Concerned, they contacted her workplace, only to learn she never arrived. They reported her missing. Her car was still parked, undisturbed. The only surveillance footage showed her driving into the garage around 9 p.m. Then nothing. Police searched every corner of the Lianfa building, but there were no signs of CU or any struggle. The path between the parking garage and the building entrance was short and open, leaving no explanation for how she could disappear in seconds. Kidnapping was considered, especially given her family's wealth, but no ransom call was ever made. Eventually, the case went cold until 7 years later, when her body was found just meters away from where she vanished. How did she end up inside a ventilation shaft? Who could have done this? And more importantly, why were the suspects acquitted? The answers to those questions and the twisted truth behind GUCU's final moments will be revealed in the next part of this case. Until then, rest well, the place where chilling mysteries unfold while you relax and drift into sleep. Tonight, we continue the haunting case of the young woman found mummified in the ventilation shaft of a Beijing office building 7 years after she vanished without a trace. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? Now, let's continue. Case 1, Part 2, A Murder Hidden in the Walls. When investigators examined the clothing and luxury handbag found with the remains, Gusu's parents were struck with an overwhelming sense of recognition. They were almost certain the items belonged to their daughter, who had disappeared in 1999. DNA testing later confirmed their fears. The mummified body was indeed CU. The signs surrounding her death left little doubt. This was no accident. CU had been murdered, her body hidden away in the basement's ventilation system, where it remained undiscovered for 7 years. The revelation stunned the public and reopened a case that had long gone cold. The police began investigating from 2 primary angles. First, there was CU herself, a beautiful, independent young woman from a wealthy family. She was stylish, often drove herself to work, and stood out in the crowd. Her background and appearance made her a target in a time when being a rich, attractive woman could draw unwanted attention. Yet those close to her said she had no enemies, no feuds, and few close friends. Was this a random attack, or was it something more calculated? Second, the location of the body told investigators something else. The place where she had been hidden was remote, deep in the B2 basement, almost never visited. Whoever hid the body had to be deeply familiar with the layout of the building. They had to know this dark corner would remain untouched. This narrowed the suspect pool significantly. In 1999, the year CU disappeared, the building, then still under construction, was temporarily home to a group of migrant construction workers. Some lived and worked in the B2 basement. It was here the police turned their focus. CU's parents revealed that back in 1999, the police never searched the B2 basement in full. That level had been locked due to unauthorized renovations, and the only people with access were the building owner and a few guards. One of them, an elderly security man named Mr. Wu, had once allowed CU's family to check the basement. But back then, no one considered the possibility that her body might be concealed inside a ventilation shaft. Now, years later, the police began interviewing everyone with keys to that basement. One of the first suspects was CU's supervisor, a man named Zhang Hua. He was in his 40s, married, and had reportedly developed an inappropriate fixation on CU. A female co-worker revealed something strange on the night of her disappearance. It was Zhang Hui who asked her to call Siyu in for urgent overtime work. After the call, he abruptly left the office and was gone for about 30 minutes, returning just after 9:40 p.m. when Siyu failed to show up. Jiang warned the co-workers not to mention his absence to anyone. The women kept quiet at the time, afraid of the consequences. When police dug deeper, they learned Jiang Hua had tried to pursue Siyu romantically, but she had firmly rejected him. This added motive to suspicion. But when they analyzed the timeline, something didn't add up. Siyu left her home after 9 p.m. and was seen on camera entering the parking garage at 9:40. Jiang had left his office at 9:10 and returned around the same time. If they did cross paths, it would have been for just a few short minutes, nowhere near enough time to abduct her, assault her, move her body, and hide it in the ventilation system. That process would have taken at least 20 to 30 minutes. Furthermore, when Zhang returned to work, his clothes were clean, his demeanor was calm, and he showed no signs of distress. For now, the police ruled him out. Investigators next turned their attention to those who held keys to the B2 floor. Besides Mr. Wu and the building's owner, one more name stood out, Mr. Liu, a contractor who supervised the basement's construction. After completing his work, he had reportedly never returned his basement key, but that night, Mr. Liu had an alibi. Several witnesses confirmed he was playing mahjong with the building owner. Meanwhile, Mr. Wu, the security guard, had suffered a stroke a year earlier, leaving him partially paralyzed. He wasn't physically capable of committing the crime. However, Mr. Wu did provide one key piece of information. On the night of the murder, he recalled seeing 3 young workers pacing around the parking lot, smoking nervously. One of them stood out Xiao Jiang, a 20-year-old laborer working under Mr. Liu. Wu said the men were intoxicated, claiming they couldn't sleep and were looking for a prostitute. He remembered feeling uneasy, but didn't report it at the time, fearing retaliation, though the exact date Mr. Wu recalled didn't line up perfectly with Siyu's disappearance. Investigators believed he may have confused the day after so many years. The discrepancy of one day wasn't enough to dismiss his memory. Police quickly located Xiao Zheng, who remarkably was still working under the same contractor. During questioning, he initially denied everything, but under pressure, he eventually confessed not only to murdering Siyu, but also to having 2 accomplices, Yang Guanghua and Wang Fuming. According to Xiao Jiang's confession, the night of the crime played out like this. The 3 men were loitering in the parking area when Siyu pulled up in her car. She stepped out, dressed fashionably, confident, and alone. The men made vulgar comments. Siyu, disgusted and furious, scolded them and turned toward the stairs, but they followed. Fueled by alcohol and sickening intent, they ambushed her. She screamed, but no one heard. In a brutal attack, the men beat her unconscious and dragged her down to the deserted B2 floor. There, they assaulted her, and realizing what they'd done to cover their crime, they carried her lifeless body to a rarely accessed ventilation shaft and sealed it away, and there it remained. For 7 years, Xiao Jiang's confession helped solve one of Beijing's most haunting cold cases, but not without controversy. The legal process was messy. Allegations of coercion, insufficient physical evidence due to decomposition, and conflicting witness statements made the case complex, and in the end, the 3 men were acquitted. The court ruled that the evidence, while damning, was not enough for a conviction beyond reasonable doubt. The city was outraged. Siyu's parents were heartbroken, and the public was left with a chilling question. How could someone get away with a murder so horrific and so hidden? Thank you for listening to Crime Whisper. If you'd like me to cover another case or continue with more unresolved mysteries, let me know in the comments below. Until next time, sleep well, and don't forget, some secrets hide in silence, and others in the walls, where real-life mysteries unfold, one whispered truth at a time. I'm here to take you through the next chapter in the disturbing case of GUCU, the young woman who vanished in 1999, only to be discovered mummified inside a Beijing building's ventilation shaft 7 years later. If you're still awake, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where are you listening from, and what time is it for you. Now, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's return to the shadows of October 1999. Case 1, Part 3, Justice Undone. According to Xiao Jiang's chilling confession, after Jusu was ambushed near the parking lot, she was dragged down into the dark, frigid depths of the B2 basement to an abandoned warehouse space few ever entered. There, the three workers Zhao Zheng, Yang Guanghua, and Wang Fuming took turns assaulting her. She fought as best she could, but outnumbered and overpowered. She eventually collapsed under the sheer brutality of their attack, fearing that she would report them to the police. The men decided to silence her permanently. They murdered Jusu. Then, they meticulously cleaned the crime scene, hiding her body inside a remote ventilation duct. In the darkness of that basement, they believed their secret would remain buried forever. For a time, it did. Based on Xiao Jiang's confession, police quickly tracked down and arrested the remaining two men, Yang Guanghua and Wang Fuming. Under interrogation, both men admitted their roles in the horrifying crime. At this point, it seemed like justice would finally be served. In 2007, the Beijing Municipal People's Procuratorate formally filed charges, and the case was brought before Beijing's first intermediate People's Court. The men were accused of rape and murder, but then, something unexpected happened. Cracks in the case as the trial began. Prosecutors encountered a major issue. The case had no physical evidence, no fingerprints, no usable DNA, no blood, no fibers, no physical trace linking the men to the crime scene. Everything hinged on the confessions, but those quickly began to fall apart. Xiao Zhang and Wang Fuming gave conflicting accounts about where the body had been hidden. Yang Guanghua, meanwhile, claimed he didn't even know where the body was concealed, and failed to mention the ventilation shaft at all. They also contradicted each other on how Siyu had been killed. Wang said he stabbed her multiple times in the chest and abdomen. Yang claimed he stabbed her once in the heart, but forensic examination revealed no stab wounds, only severe blunt force trauma. Even basic details like who opened the locked basement door or the order in which the assault took place were muddled and inconsistent. Then the situation became even murkier. In 2007, before the trial could conclude, Wang Fuming died of a cerebral infarction. Yang Guanghua appeared mentally unstable and was later diagnosed with an intellectual disability. Xiao Zhang also began showing signs of mental illness. During the trial, both surviving defendants retracted their confessions, insisting they had been coerced into making false statements. Xiao Jiang, standing before the court, said clearly, "I did not rape or kill anyone. Everything I previously confessed was untrue." The verdict faced with unreliable confessions and no concrete evidence. The court had little choice. The First Intermediate People's Court ruled that the case lacked the necessary proof for conviction. Both men were acquitted. The prosecution swiftly appealed, determined to bring justice for Siyu. But at the appellate hearing, Yang Guanghua changed his story, again now denying any involvement whatsoever. The Beijing High People's Court reviewed the case and found too many unanswered questions. There were no forensic links. The suspects couldn't explain how they accessed a locked and sealed basement. Their stories were inconsistent and, at times, implausible. And so, under Article 189, Clause 1 of China's Criminal Procedure Law, the court rejected the prosecution's appeal and upheld the original verdict. The defendants walked free. Unresolved questions, the police continued to probe the case. They tested Siyu's clothing, hoping to extract DNA evidence that might connect the suspects. But it had been too long. Time, decay, and environmental exposure had erased what little might have remained, adding to the mystery. Building staff confirmed that the basement had been locked since 1999, with access restricted to only a few technical staff. No one could explain how the men had allegedly brought CU into the sealed space. Prosecutors argued that memories might have been distorted, and the basement had undergone renovations, making it harder to reconstruct the original crime scene. But the inconsistencies and lack of hard evidence proved fatal to the case. Despite widespread belief from investigators, prosecutors, and the victim's family that these three men were responsible, the law requires proof beyond reasonable doubt. That proof was never found. And so, nearly 3 decades later, the death of GUCU remains legally unsolved. The aftermath, the case of GUCU, is now one of Beijing's most haunting unsolved crimes. It serves as a harsh reminder of how time, negligence, and lack of early forensic preservation can bury the truth forever, even when suspects are named and the motive seems clear. Justice cannot be served without solid evidence. To this day, Beijing police continue to investigate, but no new leads have emerged. The ventilation shaft that once hid a terrible secret is now just another silent part of the building's structure, a hollow echo of a life lost and justice denied. Soft ambient music begins to fade in. Thank you for listening to Crime Whisper. If this case stayed with you, let me know in the comments. Should we revisit it if new evidence ever comes to light? And now, as always, rest easy. You're safe. But remember, some crimes never truly sleep. The place where haunting truths are gently told, and the darkness of the world slowly unfolds while you rest. Tonight, we travel to a quiet town in Idaho for a case that shattered a mother's heart, tested the justice system, and left behind more questions than answers. If you're here, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, close your eyes, take a breath, and let's begin. Case 2. Angie Dodge, a murder in Idaho Falls on the afternoon of June 13th. In the small, peaceful town of Idaho Falls, 2 co-workers grew concerned when their friend and colleague, Angie Dodge, didn't show up for her shift. She hadn't answered her phone either, and that wasn't like her worried. They made their way to her apartment on the upper floor of an aging wooden building tucked away on a quiet residential street. They called out her name as they entered, but were met with silence. The living room looked normal. Nothing appeared out of place. But when they reached the bedroom, their world changed forever. Behind that door was a sight so horrific, both women screamed and ran from the apartment in terror. They immediately called the police. When officers arrived at the scene, they discovered 18-year-old Angie Dodge lying on the floor of her bedroom, her head resting against the wall beside a mattress soaked in blood. Her throat had been slashed, and her body showed 14 additional stab wounds. There were no signs of forced entry, but a struggle was evident. Police concluded that Angie had been killed sometime between 12:45 a.m. and 11:15 a.m. that day. A semen sample was recovered from the scene, suggesting Angie had been sexually assaulted before her death. When Carol Dodge, Angie's mother, was told the news, she nearly collapsed. "I just stared at that house," she later said, trying to imagine how terrified she must have been. Carol remembered the last time she saw her daughter. Angie had just pulled up outside her modest home, kissed her goodbye, and drove off. It had been a simple, everyday moment, one she never imagined would be their last. Angie had recently moved into her own place after a breakup. She was the youngest of Carol's 4 children and her only daughter. She had blonde hair, piercing eyes, and a strong-willed personality that mirrored her mother's. Now, that fire was gone. The town reacts. The murder sent shockwaves through the small, close-knit community of Idaho Falls. Violent crime was rare here. Everyone knew everyone. For something so brutal to happen in such a quiet town was unthinkable. Investigators initially believed more than one person may have been involved. They began collecting DNA from dozens of local men, including a group known as the River Rats, a loosely connected group of young men who had dropped out of school and spent their time drinking and hanging out by the river. Still no DNA match was found. The Idaho Falls Police Department, unaccustomed to solving such a complex and violent crime, quickly began to flounder. 6 months passed with no solid leads. Carol Dodge, unwilling to sit by and wait, took matters into her own hands. A mother's fight for justice. Carol distributed thousands of flyers and offered a $5,000 reward for any information related to her daughter's murder. When that brought no results, she began patrolling the streets at night, questioning people, looking for anything that might point her toward the killer. She also became a frequent visitor at the local police station, demanding answers. Officers started calling the building's back door the Carol door because of how often she came through it. They laughed at me, Carol later said. They called me a crazy, grieving mother. But Carol wasn't crazy. She was desperate, and she was right to be persistent. A lead in Nevada, January 1997. 7 months after the murder, a new lead emerged. A young man named Benjamin Hobbs, originally from Idaho Falls, was arrested in Nevada after assaulting a woman with a knife. The crime bore similarities to Angie's case. Investigators quickly zeroed in on Hobbs as a possible suspect. Hobbs denied knowing anything about Angie's murder, but detectives began to build a case around him anyway. In doing so, they took an interest in one of Hobbs' friends, Christopher Tapp, another Idaho Falls local and member of the River Rats. Tapp had known Angie. When questioned, he said he had no involvement in the crime, but the police weren't. CONVINCEDA. Flawed interrogation, over 3 weeks. Tapp was interrogated 9 times and subjected to 7 polygraph tests. After hours of pressure, confusion, and psychological manipulation, he eventually gave a confession. He and Hobbs, he said, were involved in the murder. Yet DNA tests showed that neither Tapp nor Hobbs matched the semen sample found at the crime scene. Still, detectives clung to the confession. They theorized that there must have been a third man involved. A woman at a party soon came forward, claiming she overheard Tapp and Hobbs discussing the murder, allegedly over a dispute involving money. Tapp then changed his story again, adding a new name, Jeremy's. But Sarga's DNA didn't match either. After more pressure, Tapp finally confessed that he had committed the crime alone. He claimed his earlier statements were false in an attempt to share the blame with others, despite having no physical evidence against him, only a deeply flawed and inconsistent confession. Christopher Tapp was charged with Angie Dodge's murder. Trial and conviction in May 1998. Tapp appeared in court wearing a loose-fitting navy blue suit. At the last moment, he retracted his confession, insisting it had been coerced. He reminded the court that DNA evidence had already cleared him, but no one listened. The prosecution presented a witness, a woman, who claimed she had heard Tapp admit to the killing. Carol Dodge, devastated and furious, saw Tapp as the face of evil. She cursed him in court, convinced he had taken her daughter from her. The jury deliberated for 13 hours before finding him guilty. Christopher Tapp was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Doubt remains all, though a conviction had been made. Carol Dodge's heart told her something was wrong. The DNA found on Angie's body, clear and intact, didn't belong to Tapp, Hobbs, or anyone else the police had investigated. There's someone still out there, she insisted. Even as she watched the man she believed was guilty walk into prison, she felt uneasy. The facts didn't line up, and somewhere, she believed, the real killer was walking free. Soft music begins to swell. The story of Angie Dodge does not end here. Years later, this case would take a dramatic turn, one that would call into question everything the public thought they knew, and everything the justice system had claimed. But for now, as this part of the story closes, one thing remains true. in the quiet town of Idaho Falls. The murder of Angie Dodge shattered the peace, and one mother refused to let her daughter's story be buried. Thank you for listening to Crime Whisper. If you're still awake, I hope you're resting peacefully. And if you're still with me, stay tuned for the next part of Angie's story when the truth finally begins to surface. Until then, sleep well, and remember, some truths take years to rise, but they always do. Carol Dodge couldn't let go of the belief that Christopher Tapp was hiding something. Even after his conviction, she clung to one unshakable question: why hadn't he named his accomplice? Before leaving the courtroom that day, she penned him a letter, simple, angry, desperate. "Chris, I don't understand why you didn't reveal the other person's name. I'm really angry now." Carol Dodge Bud Tapp never wrote back. Years passed. Tapp sat behind bars, and Angie Dodge's murder case went cold. But not for Carol. Driven by a relentless determination to find the person whose DNA had been left at the scene, the person who had raped and killed her daughter, Carol made it her mission to uncover the truth. Day after day, she visited the police station. She drove through neglected neighborhoods, handing out flyers, reading old reports, and watching members of the River Rats down by the Snake River, wondering if one of them was involved. A new weapon, DNA in 2009, more than 10 years after Angie's murder, the unknown DNA profile from the crime scene was entered into the National Criminal Database. There were no matches, but Carol didn't stop. She'd been given a personal computer and began searching for answers herself. She found a company that could analyze the race of an unknown DNA sample. With that information, she persuaded police to send the DNA for testing. The result: the perpetrator was 85% white. A clue. Small, but something. By this time, DNA technology had advanced rapidly. Carol, with help from a non-profit organization, urged the Idaho Falls Police Department to try a new approach: familial DNA searching. This method could look for relatives of the killer in existing offender databases, but Idaho rejected the request after 2 years of legal wrangling. Not ready to give up, DNA expert Dr. Greg Hampikian suggested something unconventional: uploading the unknown DNA profile to public genealogy databases, like Ancestry.com. The police, convinced by Carol's persistence, finally agreed. One potential match came back: a filmmaker from New Orleans who had visited Idaho Falls in 1996 and had even made a short film about the murder of a young woman. But when his DNA was tested, it wasn't a match. The Idaho Innocence Project, then, in 2012, while reading a police report, Carol noticed a detail she hadn't focused on before. Several pubic hairs had been found at the scene. The question haunted her: were they Angie's or the killer's? She turned to Dr. Hampikian, founder of the Idaho Innocence Project, a group that investigates possible wrongful convictions. Coincidentally, the organization had just taken on Christopher Tapp's case. During his years in prison, Tapp had written multiple letters pleading for help. "I didn't kill anyone or hurt anybody. Please review my case. I really need someone to help me get free." Carol was furious when she learned the Innocence Project had accepted his case. To her, Tapp was the killer. End of story. And now, she thought, he was trying to manipulate the system. She didn't care who helped him. All she wanted was the truth. Was there another man involved? DNA testing revealed a startling answer. The pubic hairs matched the semen sample already linked to the crime. In other words, there was only one male contributor. Dr. Hampikian concluded that the forensic evidence pointed to a single killer, not three, as police had previously claimed. The confession cracks. Carol was stunned. Could Tapp really be innocent? She wasn't ready to believe it. Maybe, she thought, he was at the scene, but too afraid to name his partner in crime. Then something unexpected happened. A local newspaper obtained and released over 25 hours of Tapp's original interrogation tapes. The footage was grainy, the audio was poor, but Carol watched every minute, and what she saw made her blood boil. Detective Jared Foreman was shown repeatedly leading Tapp through hypothetical scenarios, pushing him for names and feeding him information. Carol was furious. She slammed her fists on the table. Her faith in the justice system began to unravel. She reached out to Steve Dreisen, a nationally recognized expert in false confessions. After reviewing the tapes, he described the interrogation as one of the worst examples of coercion he had ever seen. Confession built on fear. Tapp had repeatedly gotten details wrong about Angie's apartment, the layout, and how she was killed. And with each session, his story changed. First, he said Hobbs did it. Then, he said they were both there. Finally, he took full blame. According to experts, this pattern was not unusual. Under extreme psychological pressure, young or vulnerable, people can be led to believe they're repressing memories or worse, made to confess just to stop the torment. Retired Judge Michael Heavy, founder of Judges for Justice, reviewed the tapes and agreed. Tapp had been deceived, manipulated, and, likely, falsely imprisoned. He pointed out how Tapp seemed completely unaware of the crime scene layout. He believed Tapp had been brainwashed. Carol's breaking point. Overwhelmed. With rage, Carol picked up the prison phone and called Tapp directly. "Hey, you bastard. You were either there or you weren't. If you were, you better tell me the name of the man you were with. And if you weren't, you better scream that you weren't." Tapp, barely holding back tears, replied, "I wasn't there. I didn't do it." Carol collapsed in tears. After years of believing he had taken her daughter's life, she now realized he hadn't. The police had manipulated her, the confession had been coerced, and she had spent more than a decade directing her fury at the wrong person. She felt like the world had betrayed her. But once that truth sank in, Carol made a promise to clear Tapp's name and keep searching for the real killer. Resistance and power. Her family thought she had lost her mind. They told her to let it go, that she was obsessed. The police, too, dismissed her findings. So did the media. Detective Foreman, the same man who led the coercive interrogations, was now mayor of Idaho Falls. He continued to insist that Tapp was guilty, but Carol no longer cared about public opinion. When Tapp heard that Carol had changed her mind, he broke down in his cell. Through tears, he finally explained why he confessed. At the time, he was a high school dropout with no job and easy target for suspicion. He thought he was just helping the police, but once they turned on him, they wouldn't let go. They threatened him with the death penalty. They wore him down. They scared him into a false confession. Soft piano note fades. The truth was finally rising to the surface. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. And Carol Dodge, who once cursed Christopher Tapp in open court, was now his most powerful advocate. But what about the real killer? The DNA was still there. And Carol, she wasn't done yet. At the time of his confession, Christopher Tapp was just a scared and confused 20-year-old. During questioning, a police officer warned him he could face the death penalty unless he confessed. They told him that if he took full responsibility, he might receive a lighter sentence. Terrified and desperate, Tapp agreed, but when he stood before the court, he tried to explain that the confession wasn't true, that he hadn't killed Angie. Dodge, no one believed him, and when he later learned that Angie's mother, Carol Dodge, had wanted him sentenced to death, his heart sank. In his own words, it felt like he had signed his own death warrant, yet everything changed. Carol once his most vocal critics did. The public, when she publicly declared her belief that Christopher Tapp was not involved in her daughter's murder. The woman who had once wanted him executed became his most devoted advocate by 2013, thanks to Carol's relentless campaign. The media and members of the public began to change their view of Tapp, but proving his innocence in the eyes of the law would be far more difficult. Legal hurdles, and a turning point in 2016. Tapp's legal team filed a motion to overturn his conviction. arguing that his confession had been coerced. His lawyers also highlighted inconsistencies between Tapp's statements and the established facts of the case. For instance, Angie had been seen alive at 12:30 a.m. by friends, and medical findings suggested she had been asleep for several hours before she was killed. Tapp, however, claimed the murder happened around 1 a.m., a timeline that didn't fit. Under mounting pressure from Carol, Tapp's legal team, and the media, prosecutors offered a compromise. They would drop the assault charge, but maintain the murder conviction. This deal would result in a sentence equal to the time Tapp had already served, giving him immediate release, but not full exoneration. Despite warnings from his lawyers, Tapp, after 20 years behind bars, accepted the deal in 2017. He just wanted to be free. That same year, the woman who had testified against him recanted her statement. She admitted that police had threatened to charge her with drug possession unless she testified. When she had trouble remembering specific details, officers reassured her that her memory lapses were due to her drug use. Tapp walked out of prison in 2017, free, but still officially labeled a murderer. Carol was there. She stood beside him during the hearing, and when he stepped out, she was among the first to embrace him. The hatred once in her eyes had vanished. She now believed in his innocence. Sand was determined to prove it to the world. A mother's final mission, though. Tapp was free. The stigma remained. Carol wasn't done. Determined to find the real killer, she worked alongside Idaho Falls Police Chief Bryce Johnson, who had reopened the case. Carol advocated for the use of advanced genealogical DNA technology when experts hesitated due to the degraded quality of the DNA sample. Carol personally reached out and pleaded with them to try. It worked. Using sophisticated genealogical tracing, the expert was able to reconstruct a partial DNA profile and identify a distant relative of the unknown suspect. Through careful elimination and family tree mapping, the trail eventually led to one man, Brian Lee Dripps. The shocking twist: Dripps had lived directly across the street from Angie Dodge in 1996. In May 2019, investigators covertly collected a discarded cigarette from Dripps. When the DNA from the cigarette was tested, it was a perfect match to the semen found at the crime scene. Dripps was arrested shortly after, a confession finalized during interrogation. Brian Dripps confessed. He admitted that he had acted alone. He didn't know Tapp. On the night of the murder, he had been drunk and high. When Angie resisted his assault, he killed her in a press conference following the arrest. Carol Dodge now, visibly aged from decades of grief and battle-back tears. I can't even describe how difficult this journey was. How many people were hurt by the police's mistake, she said. Dripps pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Tapp's legal team, now armed with overwhelming proof of his innocence, filed for a complete exoneration in July 2019. Christopher Tapp was finally declared innocent. On that day, he embraced Carol again. She had become more than an ally, called her his second mother. If it weren't for Carol, I would have died with this conviction on my record, Tapp said. Photos of Carol hugging Tapp, comforting him like a mother would her own son, moved people across the nation. Justice after injustice. After his exoneration, Tapp dedicated himself to advocacy. He worked to change state laws, helping push legislation that provided financial compensation to the wrongfully convicted. He received over $1 million in compensation, and later, an $11.7 million settlement from a civil lawsuit against the city of Idaho Falls and its police department. But the story took one final, heartbreaking turn in 2023. Christopher Tapp was found murdered in a hotel room in Las Vegas. He was just 47 years old. Music softens, voice lowers. He spent half his life in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and just a few years truly free. His story is a reminder of how powerful injustice can be, but it also shows us the strength of love, truth, and perseverance, especially from a mother who refused to stop fighting. Carol Dodge never got her daughter back, but she gave another innocent person his life back. The man behind the horrifying abduction of a young girl was Sato Yoshiyuki, someone who had already shown signs of dangerous behavior long before the crime came to light. Back in June 1989, a year before the infamous kidnapping, Sato had targeted a 9-year-old girl. He approached her as she walked alone, claiming he simply liked children and wanted to chat. Fortunately, his suspicious behavior was noticed in time, and authorities intervened before anything worse could happen. He was arrested, tried, and sentenced to just 1 year in prison with a 3-year suspended sentence. No one could have imagined that within the first year of his probation, Sato would go on to commit one of the most appalling crimes in Japanese history, abducting a young girl and holding her captive for 9 excruciating years. A childhood stolen, a life nearly destroyed, a house of secrets. Sato didn't live alone. He shared the house with his elderly mother. This fact alone should have made it nearly impossible to hide such a horrific secret. After all, how could someone keep a missing child imprisoned under the same roof without being discovered? But Sato was cunning. He controlled every detail of the girl's captivity, keeping her existence hidden from the world, even from his own family. He confined the girl in a small, windowless room where sunlight barely reached. Fear and anxiety became her constant companions. She never knew when the next wave of violence would come. Sato not only beat her, but manipulated her mind with relentless threats and psychological torture. Cruel control from the earliest days of the kidnapping. Sato feared she might try to escape, so whenever he left the house or went to sleep, he tied her hands and feet tightly, rendering her completely immobile. Over time, the girl's spirit began to break. Her initial resistance faded. She stopped fighting back, not because she was no longer afraid, but because she no longer had the strength. Eventually, when Sato believed she was too broken to resist, he loosened his grip slightly. Her hands were no longer bound, but her legs remained tied for more than a year afterward. She was utterly alone, no other human contact, no light, no voice but his. And always the warning: if anyone ever found out she was there, she would be killed. Anytime he was upset, angry, or frustrated, she became his target. Over the years, she endured more than 700 beatings, many of them minor, but between 200 and 300 were severe, leaving her battered and bruised for weeks. She learned how to protect herself, how to survive. She knew he often aimed for her face, so she would shield her eyes because to her, losing her sight meant losing her only chance to one day escape. Deprivation and starvation. Incredibly, throughout the years of captivity, Sato Yoshiyuki did not sexually assault the girl, but his cruelty came in other forms, systematic and inescapable. Every aspect of her life was under his control when she could sleep, eat, move, or speak. At first, he fed her 3 basic meals a day, not out of kindness, but simply to keep her alive for his own twisted needs. Then, after 6 years in captivity, things changed. Sato noticed a small mole on her foot. Irrationally, he decided this meant she had diabetes. Terrified of being caught if he took her to a hospital, he came to a horrific conclusion: starvation might improve her condition and reduce the risk of exposure, so he cut her food down to 1 small meal a day. She began wasting away, malnourished, dizzy, and barely able to stand. She watched her own body wither, but still, she clung to life. Eventually, Sato added a single rice cake to her meager rations, just enough to keep her from dying. This starvation diet continued for 3 years, from when she was 15 until her rescue. She was never allowed to bathe. Only when she accidentally fell off the bed and got covered in dirt did he permit her a bath. First in years. a mother's breaking point as time passed. Sato Yoshiyuki's mental state deteriorated further. By 1999, he had become increasingly unstable, not only abusing the girl, but also turning on his elderly mother. He began using a stun gun on her, tormenting her with unpredictable outbursts of violence. Terrified and desperate, his mother turned to a psychiatric hospital for help. At the hospital's recommendation, she made the painful decision to have her son forcibly committed. She knew his condition was only worsening and that someone needed to intervene. Before things got even worse, a special treatment team was dispatched to the house. A discovery in the shadows when medical staff arrived to admit Sato Yoshiyuki for psychiatric treatment. They were met with immediate hostility. He screamed, resisted violently, and refused to let them inside. Forced to act, the team sedated him on the spot. As the struggle unfolded and attention focused on the violent outburst, a quiet movement caught one staff member's eye. From a dark corner of the house, a figure slowly emerged. She was impossibly thin, her skin pale from years without sunlight, her clothing tattered, her eyes hollow and terrified. She had been hiding in plain sight for 9 years. She could barely stand. The girl, frail, terrified, and skeletal, was the same one who had vanished without a trace 9 years earlier. A child the world had presumed dead was now standing in front of stunned medical staff. A ghost returned from darkness. Immediately after her discovery, she was taken to the police station. There, fingerprint records confirmed what no one dared believe. She was the missing elementary school girl abducted nearly a decade ago. Shock rippled through every officer present. She had finally been rescued from a decade of captivity at the hands of Sato Yoshiyuki. When police notified the girl's parents, they rushed to the station in disbelief. Before them stood a figure, nearly unrecognizable. Her long, matted hair covered most of her body. Her face was pale, her expression empty. It was hard to tell if she was even the same person, but around her neck was a charm, a protective amulet she'd worn as a child. Her parents recognized it instantly. They embraced her without hesitation, the three of them collapsing into sobs. Just across the street, once she regained her composure, the girl told investigators something even more disturbing. She had been held in the second-floor room of a house, just 600 meters from the local police station and directly across the street from her own home. Her captor, a neighbor. News of her rescue sent a shockwave through Japan. The country was gripped by disbelief and fury. Hundreds of officers had spent years searching. Yet the girl was found not by police, but by chance, during a psychiatric intervention for her abductor. Even more infuriating, Sato Yoshiyuki had a known history, a previous conviction for attempting to harass a child. Still, he had never been on the official suspect list, a nation outraged on the very day she was rescued. The police officers assigned to the case weren't even at their desks. They were attending a party at a local hotel. When the event ended, several went off to play mahjong, completely ignoring the biggest breakthrough in the case. Public outrage exploded amid the national backlash. The Nagata Police Department launched an internal investigation. Officials were forced to admit their mistakes. Police had visited Sato's house 3 times over the years, and never once discovered the imprisoned girl. He had hidden her in plain sight for nearly a decade. Sato's mind and his crimes following his arrest. Sato was sent for a medical evaluation and treated for 2 weeks before being formally detained. Psychiatrists diagnosed him with schizoid personality disorder, SCPD, and obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, OCPD, conditions that helped explain his isolation and obsession, but not excuse his cruelty. He claimed that throughout the years of captivity, he suffered hallucinations and delusional thinking. But mental health experts concluded these symptoms were likely self-induced, stemming from his reclusive lifestyle, not a legitimate reason to absolve him of responsibility. In court, Sato made shocking, twisted claims. He said he never thought of the girl as a prisoner, but simply wanted a companion. His bizarre justification only further enraged the public. The verdict, and the backlash after reviewing the psychiatric reports and evidence. The court sentenced Sato Yoshiyuki to 14 years in prison. For many, this was a slap in the face. 14 years for kidnapping a child, holding her in a windowless room for nearly a decade, and subjecting her to relentless abuse. The public erupted in anger. Petitions were signed. Protesters gathered outside courthouses. The sentence, many felt, was insultingly light. Yet, the court refused to revise the ruling. In 2016, Sato completed his sentence and returned home, but his return to society was short-lived. A year later, in 2017, he was found dead reportedly from illness. His death closed one of the darkest chapters in Japan's modern criminal history, but it left scars that may never fully heal. The police knew the suspects couldn't have gone far. Acting quickly, they launched a citywide manhunt. For a while though, it felt like the trail was already going cold. Then an unexpected breakthrough. A local hunter, trekking through a remote forest, stumbled upon something horrifying, a shallow grave. Inside, the partially buried body of a woman, still wearing a name tag that read Wang Chenjin. The moment the call came in, a chill swept through the investigation team. It was the lead they'd been waiting for, but one they'd hoped never to receive. Police and forensic experts immediately descended on the forest. With great care, they excavated the site. The scene they uncovered was gruesome. Wang's body was clothed in tattered garments, her frame bruised and battered, but it was the condition of her head that shocked everyone most. It had sustained such violent trauma, it was nearly unrecognizable. The autopsy confirmed the worst. Wang Chenjin had died from strangulation. The force applied to her neck had been so intense, it blocked her airway completely, causing death within minutes. But that wasn't all. The forensic team also documented severe head injuries, including a skull fracture and signs of internal bleeding, suggesting she was struck with a blunt object. What stunned investigators most, however, was the DNA. Biological samples collected from Wang's body revealed the presence of DNA from 3 different men, confirming she had been sexually assaulted before her murder. This evidence was rushed to the National DNA Database, and the investigation kicked into overdrive. Within hours, police had names, 3 suspects, and a location. All 3 were hiding in Fuan City, Fujian Province, attempting to lay low. But they'd made a fatal mistake. They were still driving Wang's stolen BMW when officers moved in. The suspects were caught off guard, disoriented, panicked, and with no plan for escape. They were arrested on the spot, without resistance. We knew she was special. During interrogation, the 3 suspects Shi Jing, Jin and Shou made a chilling admission. We knew she had a special identity. If we had known from the start, we wouldn't have killed her. But once we realized, it was too late. We couldn't risk letting her go. Investigators learned that each of the suspects had noticeable physical traits. One had a deformed hand, another had a raspy, unclear voice from a congenital condition. The third stuttered when agitated. These distinctive characteristics made them easily identifiably and deepened their fear of being recognized by Wang, even though she promised not to expose them. They didn't believe her. They feared that once she was free, their faces distinct would lead to their quick arrest. So they made a choice, to kill her, rather than take the risk. A crime born of greed and cowardice. The 3 were unemployed and known locally for petty crimes, robbery, scams, and theft. On the day of the kidnapping, they noticed Wang's brand new BMW parked outside her workplace. They'd been watching her for hours, as she walked toward her car after a long day. Likely excited to pick up her daughter, the 3 men saw their chance. Just as she opened the driver's door, they rushed in, brandishing knives and forcing her inside. Though Wang was a trained police officer, she was unarmed and and outnumbered. Overpowered, she was taken away without a chance to resist. At first, their goal was simple: rob her. They found a few hundred yuan in her wallet, but when they noticed her luxury car and police ID, they assumed she had more money in the bank. Under duress, Wang gave them her ATM pin. They withdrew over 10,000 yuan, around $3 and thought they were in the clear. But when they realized she was law enforcement, panic took over. They feared she would track them down, that she'd never stop. The final plan, desperate and afraid, they decided Wang couldn't be allowed to live. They stopped at a small supply store. 2 stayed with Wang, while the 3rd went inside to buy rope, gloves, and a hammer. Their plan was simple, brutal: eliminate the witness and cover their tracks. They drove to a remote forest outside the city, from view, quiet, perfect for what they intended to do. Before killing her, they paused for a moment and looked at Wang. She was young, slim, quiet, still hoping to survive. But mercy was never part of their plan. They struck her, bound her, strangled her until she went limp. Then they buried her under the cold forest soil, believing they had erased all traces of their crime. But they were wrong. Thanks to the relentless efforts of law enforcement, a vigilant community, and a random hunter's horrifying discovery, Wang Chenjin was finally brought home. She never got to see her daughter that night, but her bravery, her resistance, and the fight to bring her killers to justice ensured she would never be forgotten. Somber piano music fades, and coming up next, we explore another shocking case, one that questions not only guilt and innocence, but whether the justice system can ever truly make things right. To the 3 men, Wang Chenjin's youthful beauty made her stand out. Perhaps they believed she had no strength left to resist. Whatever humanity they had left faded in that moment. What followed was an act of brutality so heinous, it shocked the nation. They took turns restraining her, then, without hesitation, they committed a violent sexual assault. But their cruelty didn't stop there. Once they had satisfied their twisted desires, the 3 men beat Wang mercilessly. Then, in a final act of calculated evil, they buried her alive in a deep forest pit, leaving her to die beneath the soil. A pattern of predation. As police dug into their backgrounds, a horrifying pattern emerged. These were not first-time offenders. The same tactics: surveillance, ambush, sexual assault, and violence had been used before. The men had formed a criminal gang years earlier, roaming between Rujiang and Fujian provinces. They were predators hunting vulnerable women, especially those who appeared young, wealthy, and physically weak. Strong male victims were avoided. Their hunting grounds were rural towns with poor surveillance, and their method was disturbingly efficient: drive through a village, spot a target, and strike when no one was watching. It was quick, brutal, and effective. Previous victims: in one case, they stalked a woman named Yuan, waiting until she reached her apartment entrance. They ambushed her, dragging her into their car. After robbing her, they drove to an isolated road. There, despite her desperate resistance, they took turns assaulting her, choking her until she was too weak to fight back. Then, they struck her on the head with a blunt object and dumped her body at the roadside, covering it with branches. There was no remorse, only satisfaction that they had not been caught. 3 days later, emboldened, they struck again. Early one morning, they abducted Ms. Miao, forced her into their car, stole her belongings, then violated her, just as they had done before. Later that same day, they robbed a man named Young, though not their typical target. His expensive jewelry and cash made him appealing. When a scuffle broke out, they tied him up and stuffed him in the car's trunk. But fate gave Young a chance. The bumpy country road helped him loosen the ropes. As the car slowed for a turn, he kicked open the trunk and leaped out, fleeing into the woods. He survived, and his report helped confirm the gang's violent history. A year of terror police later confirmed that between 2010 and 2011, The gang committed dozens of crimes in just 1 year. They had sexually assaulted multiple women. At least one died. Many were traumatized. All were forever changed. Among the victims was Wang Chen-shina, decorated officer, mother, and a rising star in law enforcement. When the suspects were asked what Wang said in her final moments, their answer left the courtroom in tears. She begged us, said her child was waiting for her at home. But we didn't care. Wang Chenjin, a life of purpose. Wang was just 37, though many mistook her for a woman in her 20s, thanks to her youthful appearance. From an early age, she stood out for her intelligence and diligence. Teachers described her as a quick learner and a compassionate soul. She earned admission to one of the country's top law universities and later joined the county police force, where she quickly made a name for herself. She never used her gender as an excuse. Instead, she worked harder than most, impressing even her male colleagues. Many viewed her as a role model, the kind of officer every department needed. Her discipline and grace earned her the nickname, the most beautiful policewoman. Her personal life was equally admirable. She had a loving husband, educated, kind, devoted, and, together, they raised a bright young daughter. Had it not been for that fateful encounter, Wang was on track to become a senior leader in her department. She would have had many more years to serve, lead, and love. Instead, her life was stolen. Her daughter left motherless. Her family shattered, no remorse even. After their arrest, the three criminals showed no sign of guilt. In court, they attempted to gain sympathy by citing family hardship, hoping for leniency. But their records told a different story. Two of them had already served prison time. Instead of rehabilitation, they returned more ruthless than ever. Their list of charges stretched across dozens of pages. CS1, a scar left on another human life. These were not petty thieves anymore. They were repeat offenders, serial predators, and killers. Their crimes crossed every boundary, legal, moral, and human. Justice delivered at trial. The court found the evidence overwhelming and the crimes inexcusable. The verdict was swift and final. Death sentences for all three men. Their executions were not only a punishment, but a public declaration, a message that such depravity will never be tolerated. Wang Chenxian's death was senseless, but the justice delivered in her name became a moment of reckoning. She was more than just a victim. She was a symbol of dedication, courage, and sacrifice. Soft music swells, transitioning to piano. Coming up next, we explore a haunting legend from northern Mexico. It begins in a small bridal shop where one mannequin seems too real, and the truth behind it too eerie to ignore. If you ever find yourself wandering through the bustling streets of Chihuahua, Mexico, and ask locals about the city's most curious attraction, they might not point you to a monument or museum. Instead, they'll likely tell you about a bridal shop, La Popular, and the mannequin that stands in its window, a bride named La Pascualita. But what draws crowds isn't the wedding dress she wears, it's the mannequin itself. From the very first day La Pascualita appeared in the shop window, she caused a stir. Locals were captivated, and then unsettled. Her glassy eyes don't just look real, they seem to follow you. Her skin has a soft, lifelike texture, with veins just beneath the surface, and her hands too detailed to be synthetic, delicate fingernails and what some swear are actual capillaries. Even the staff admit, she doesn't look like a mannequin, she looks like a preserved human being. And stranger still, La Pascualita's face bears an eerie resemblance to Pascuala Esparza, the original owner of the store. Low piano notes, melancholic tone. Pascuala was a self-made woman, a single mother to a daughter named Cara Bright, beautiful young woman with a passion for designing wedding gowns. At just 22, Cara fell in love with a handsome sailor who shared an unusual hobby, collecting exotic spiders. Before the wedding, he gifted Cara a suitcase and asked her not to open it. But on the day of her wedding, curiosity got the best of her. Inside was a black widow. The bite was fatal. Kara died in her bridal gown, on the day she was supposed to begin her new life. The tragedy devastated Pasquale, but rumors suggest there may have been more to the story. Some believe the mother had disapproved of the sailor objecting to his career at sea and wanting her daughter to marry someone more stable, perhaps a businessman. They say Kara, heartbroken and torn, may have taken her own life in protest, using the spider as a means of rebellion, making her mother live with the regret. No one knows for sure. There was no funeral, no grave, no public mourning. Just months after the tragedy, Pasquale unveiled a new mannequin in her shop. She named it La Pascualita, name that translates to Little Pasquale or Little Daughter. Coincidence? The locals didn't think so. Tension builds soft whispering wind, subtle heartbeat like percussion. It wasn't long before strange things started to happen. One evening, a cleaning woman reported hearing rustling sounds after the store had closed. When she investigated, she found La Pascualita had changed position. Startled, she called out to her co-workers. No one responded. The shop was empty. The mannequin stood silent, staring. By morning, La Pascualita was back in her original place. The cleaner quit the next day, and she wasn't the only one. Other employees began reporting the same eerie events. The mannequin would shift positions. Her eyes would seem to blink. Some said she watched them work. Those assigned to change her clothing were especially disturbed. Quiet piano, single haunting violin. Sonia Burciaga, one of the seamstresses, recalled her experience. Touching her hand, she said, felt like touching a human being. One day, while alone in the back room with La Pascualita, Sonia turned her back for only a moment. She felt a presence behind her, something watching. When she spun around, she swore. She blinked at me. Another employee, Maria, refused to dress the mannequin unless someone else was in the room. They were convinced La Pascualita wasn't made of plastic or wax. She was something else. Shift to investigative tone, soft synth and ambient strings. The rumors caught the attention of scientists, skeptics, and journalists. Among them was Yolanda Robles, an American forensic expert. After examining La Pascualita's fingers, she noted the realism of the fingerprints, the natural texture of the skin, and the astonishing detail in the veins and nails. To her, it felt more like embalmed flesh than plastic. Other experts drew comparisons to Rosalia Lombardo, the famous Sleeping Beauty child mummy in Italy, whose father had her perfectly embalmed. Rosalia's preserved features have endured for over a century. Her hair, skin, even eyelashes nearly intact. Could a similar technique explain La Pascualita's lifelike features? Some suggested the mannequin's hair might be a wig, or that the eyes had been replaced, but the hands remained the most compelling evidence. Darkened purple, dry at the tips just like a real human body post-mortem. Cut to skeptics, faster tempo, rational tone. But not everyone was convinced. The Museum of Hoaxes and multiple funeral industry professionals dismissed the theory outright. They argued that for a human body to remain so perfectly preserved in a store window, exposed to heat, humidity, and lighted, would require constant care, refrigeration, and expensive embalming chemicals. Thomas Prower, a leading expert on funeral science, explained, preserving a corpse under these conditions for this long would be almost impossible unless someone was actively maintaining it, like a museum artifact in a bridal shop. Unlikely. Still, the legend persists. Visitors continue to flock to La Popular, peering through the window at the silent bride. Some leave flowers, others whisper prayers, and many walk away with the same unsettling feeling. She's watching me. So what do you believe? Is La Pascualita just an expertly crafted mannequin? Or is she something far more macabre, grieving mother's desperate attempt to preserve what she lost? Pause. Music fades. Coming up next, a case of disappearance, a family torn apart, and a hidden truth that would remain buried for over 2 decades. Despite claims that modern embalming techniques can preserve a body upright for a limited time, experts argue it's impossible for a mummy to remain in flawless condition indefinitely, especially not in the conditions of a retail display. La Pascualita has stood in a store window, directly exposed to the harsh sunlight and desert heat of northern Mexico for nearly a century. That alone makes the theory that she's an embalmed corpse extremely unlikely. As time passes, a mummy's freshness fades. Exposure to the elements, human contact, and the natural breakdown of organic matter all contribute to decay. And yet, La Pascualita remains eerily pristine. Thomas Prower, a respected funeral expert, confidently dismissed the mummy theory. As someone with years of experience handling preserved bodies, he said, "I can assure you La Pascualita is not a mummy." He went on to explain that while some mummies have lasted for centuries, they were preserved under highly controlled conditions. That kind of preservation requires specialized climate control, expensive materials, and constant care, none of which exist inside a bridal shop. Even in the semi-arid climate of Chihuahua, where heat may help delay decomposition, it's not nearly enough to explain a perfectly preserved body after 95 years. Prower also pointed to La Pascualita's face. If she were truly a mummy, her lips and eyelids would have long since dried out and shriveled. Instead, her face remains smooth, her skin almost youthful. It just doesn't add up still. Legends have a life of their own. Transition to storytelling tone, soft wind, and acoustic guitar. One such tale speaks of a French magician who once visited La Poplar after hours. According to local legend, he cast a spell to bring La Pascualita to life for just one night. Under the moonlight, they danced, drank wine, and whispered stories only the two of them would ever know. And when morning came, she returned to her place in the shop window, silent still, and waiting. It's stories like these where fact meets folklore that keep La Pascualita alive in the public imagination. And perhaps more practically, they also keep the shop's business alive, even after multiple changes in ownership. The bridal shop has kept La Pascualita on display, turning her into a powerful marketing symbol. Teresa Cordova, a student from the University of New Mexico, once tried to arrange an interview with the shop for her thesis in 2012. But when she returned, she was told no interview had ever been scheduled. The store owner, apparently, believed that talking about La Pascualita would bring bad luck. When Cordova turned to church archives in search of records about the supposed death of the shopkeeper's daughter, she found nothing. No death certificate, no obituary, no official trace dot, just a mannequin in a window and a town full of whispers. And when Cordova finally asked the current owner what the truth was, they simply smiled and said, "Is it true? I really couldn't say." SFX, sudden shift, emergency call tone. Then silence. Case 6. The Hunt Family Murders, Hertfordshire, England, July 2024. At 6:52 p.m. on July 9, 2024. The 999 emergency hotline received a faint call from a young woman in distress. Just minutes later, a second call came in, this time from a young man. Both referred to the same address, Ashland, Close, HERTFORDSHIRE. Police responded immediately. What they found inside was horrifying. Lying on the floor of the Hunt family home were 3 women brutally attacked. Carol Hunt, 61, was found lifeless, covered in multiple stab wounds. Near the entrance, Hannah Hunt, 28, was barely clinging to life, pierced by crossbow bolts to her chest and back. Officers rushed her to the hospital, but she died en route from massive blood loss. The youngest, Louise Hunt, 25, was also found with fatal crossbow injuries. But something about Louise's body disturbed the investigators. Her pants had been pulled down, suggesting a possible sexual assault. Curiously, the same violation had not been inflicted on her sister or mother. This detail raised immediate red flags. The attacker's true target, it seemed, had been Louise. Investigators began combing through the scene. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing stolen. The house had not been ransacked. It suggested one thing. The killer had likely been invited in. That theory gained traction when police uncovered a telling clue on a cabinet of vodka bottle, bearing a foreign fingerprint. This, combined with Louise's apparent assault, pointed to someone known to the family, possibly an ex-lover. That suspicion was soon confirmed. The three victims were the wife and daughters of John Hunt, a prominent BBC horse racing commentator. At the time of the murders, John and his eldest daughter Amy were not home spared. But as detectives examined Hannah's phone, they found a chilling trail. At 6:52 p.m., Hannah had texted her boyfriend asking him to call the police, but she never explained why. Moments later, she called emergency services herself. But by the time officers arrived, it was too late. SFX, CCTV, rewind, beep, camera clicks. Security footage from the neighborhood captured a man walking past the house at 6:55 p.m. A large object wrapped in a white duvet cover. The Hunt family was missing that exact duvet. Worse yet, their doorbell camera had recorded everything. The man on the footage was quickly identified, Kyle Clifford, a former British Army soldier, and Louise's ex-boyfriend. Police issued an urgent appeal. Kyle Clifford is believed to be armed and dangerous. Do not approach him. Call 999 immediately. SFX, manhunt-themed police radio static. Dogs barking for the next 22 hours. Police scoured the area, fearing Kyle might return to finish what he started, perhaps targeting John Hunt or his surviving daughter Amy. The search ended the next evening, on July 10th at 6 p.m., near Enfield Cemetery. Kyle Clifford had been hiding, possibly waiting to escape, or planning something far worse. But when he saw officers closing in, sniffer dogs leading the way, he panicked. He turned the same crossbow on himself and fired into his chest. SFX, breathless silence, slow heartbeat fade in miraculously. Kyle survived. He was severely injured, bleeding out, but alive soon to face the weight of the evidence against him. Police recovered the murder weapon, linking it to the projectiles used on Louise and Hannah. Forensics confirmed the fingerprints on the vodka bottle matched his, and the doorbell footage left little room for doubt. But as investigators dug deeper, one question lingered. What drove a man to such calculated brutality, and why didn't anyone see it coming? Closing tone, soft fade out with ominous string swell coming up next. The interrogation, the trial, and a family's search for justice in the aftermath of one of England's most shocking modern murders. Stay with us. Case 6 continued. Kyle Clifford and the Hunt family murders. After apprehending Kyle Clifford near Enfield Cemetery, police rushed him to the Royal London Hospital under tight security. His injuries were severe, a self-inflicted crossbow wound to the chest, and doctors were unsure whether he would survive. Alongside him, officers recovered several disturbing items: a crossbow, a combat knife, rope, and duct tape. As he lay recovering, unable to speak with investigators, detectives uncovered a chilling note written in his hand. "I could be a better man, but I choose not to." The haunting message offered a glimpse into Kyle's state of mind: cold, detached, and fully aware of his actions. Asterisk, while awaiting his medical stabilization, authorities began piecing together Kyle's background. Born in 1998, Kyle had briefly served in the Queen's Dragoon Guards, enlisting in 2019 and leaving the military. Just 3 years later, in 2022, his former sergeant, Amber Nollies, described him as undisciplined, careless, and lacking commitment during his training after leaving the army. Kyle worked briefly at a fire safety company before being fired. Those who knew him in school and in his short-lived career remembered him as impulsive, a young man fascinated by chaos and recklessness. His own brother, Bradley Clifford, was serving a life sentence for a violent crime, and Kyle frequently invoked his brother's legacy to intimidate others. The case grew darker. After sustaining a serious injury during his attempted suicide, Kyle became paralyzed from the waist down. Despite overwhelming evidence, CCTV footage, fingerprints, witness accounts, and his own purchase of the murder tools, he refused to admit guilt. Kyle had dated Louise Hunt in early 2023, but the relationship had become increasingly controlling and volatile. Louise ended things in June 22. For just weeks later, Kyle arrived at her family home on July 9th, carrying with him a deadly arsenal. Investigators believe the events unfolded in stages. Kyle was led inside by Carol Hunt, Louise's mother, possibly unaware of his true intent. What followed was a brutal and calculated attack. Louise returned home and was immediately restrained and assaulted. Soon after, Hannah Hunt, her sister, entered the home and was violently attacked as well. Despite her injuries, Hannah managed to call emergency services. Her desperate attempt to survive ultimately provided police with a vital timeline. During the trial, Kyle refused to attend hearings, denied all charges, and reportedly consumed disturbing online content, though the court ruled this inadmissible. Witnesses described him as emotionally manipulative and controlling throughout his relationship with Louise. The case drew national attention, reigniting public awareness of coercive control, relationship violence, and warning signs too often ignored. Transition music, somber desert wind fades in. Case 7, the West Mesa Bone Collector, Albuquerque, New Mexico. On a scorching afternoon in New Mexico, police received a tip that would open one of the most harrowing investigations in the state's history. A human bone had been found in a vacant lot on the West Mesa, a barren stretch of land that had once been cleared for construction. When detectives arrived, they found not one, but multiple bone fragments. Over the following weeks, a massive excavation unfolded under the unrelenting desert sun. Teams of over 20 detectives and forensic specialists combed through the rocky, sun-baked soil. What they uncovered left even seasoned investigators shaken. Scattered across the site were the remains of at least 11 women, most of them young, aged between 18 and 25. Some skeletons were nearly intact. Others had been reduced to fragments by time, weather, and possibly heavy machinery that had disturbed the area during earlier leveling work. Despite the challenges, investigators worked tirelessly to reconstruct the bodies, carefully reassembling bones and applying advanced forensic techniques to restore what they could. Their first identification came through dental records. The victim was Victoria Chavez, a young woman known to have worked in the sex trade. Her remains were so decomposed that neither the cause of death nor exact time of death could be determined. But one fact was clear: she had been deliberately buried in what now appeared to be a mass grave. 5 days later, the second victim was identified: Gina Michelle Valdez, born in 1982. She had been 4 months pregnant at the time of her murder. Like Victoria, Gina had vanished suddenly. Her family had spent years searching, calling hospitals, shelters, and police stations, only to receive no answers. Now they had one, but not the one they had hoped for. Authorities began to see a pattern. The victims were young women, mostly, involved in prostitution, and their remains were intentionally concealed. The case shocked Albuquerque to its core. Families with missing daughters came forward with photos, DNA samples, and decades of quiet grief. Fear spread quickly, especially among sex workers, who now felt more vulnerable than ever. At a public press conference, the Albuquerque police chief attempted to calm the public, saying, "All indications suggest these victims were buried years ago. There's no reason to believe an active serial killer is still at large." But his words had the opposite effect. For many, especially those in vulnerable communities, the statement felt dismissive, even dangerous. Police responded by accelerating their investigation. They compiled a list of missing local women, most of whom had ties to prostitution or drug use, and began the arduous process of cross-referencing those names with DNA extracted from the West Mesa remains. Thanks to modern testing, another victim was soon identified, Cinnamon Elks, a 32-year-old woman with a long arrest record to 19 charges for prostitution, 12 for drug possession. But Cinnamon's story ran deeper than criminal records. According to her mother, Cinnamon had once been close with Victoria Chavez and Gina Valdez. All three women had lived in the same impoverished neighborhood, forming bonds of survival and solidarity. They weren't just statistics, they were daughters, sisters, and friends. And now, all three were buried in the same dry wasteland, forgotten until now. Outro tone. Rising strings swell with echoing piano notes. The investigation into the West Mesa murders continues. 11 women, 1 unborn child, a serial predator still unidentified, and a community left with more questions than answers. Who buried them? Why were they chosen? And how many more are still out there? Stay with us. Next episode, we dive into the key suspects, the controversial leads, and the chilling nickname that would define this case for years, the West Mesa Bone Collector. Case 7 continued. The West Mesa Bone Collector. The more investigators uncovered about the victims found in Albuquerque's West Mesa, the clearer it became this wasn't random. These women shared more than a burial site. They had lived closely knit lives, often connected through the streets they worked, the struggles they faced, and, tragically, the vices that consumed them. Each had a history of drug use and had worked in prostitution realities that placed them at higher risk and yet also made them more invisible to society at large. The fourth identified victim was Julian Cindy Neto, a single mother trying to survive in Albuquerque. Lacking stable work, she eventually turned to sex work to support herself and her child. The last confirmed sighting of her was in August 2004 in a crowded part of the city. Then, nothing. She vanished without a trace, leaving her family consumed by silence and unanswered questions. Years later, forensic experts confirmed that her remains were among those unearthed in the West Mesa gravesite. With each identification, detectives worked feverishly to find the thread that might link these women's lives and deaths. They hoped to uncover a clear pattern or motive, anything that might lead to the killer. But the investigation offered more questions than answers. After a year of relentless work, investigators had examined every bone fragment, hair strand, and fingernail dug from the dry desert soil. They estimated the murders occurred between 2003 and 2005. Strangely, all of the victims were found naked, with no trace of personal belongings, no clothing, no wallets, no IDs. It was as if someone had wiped away their identities before burying them. This eerie detail raised a disturbing theory. The killer may have kept their personal items as trophies, a pattern often seen in serial killers with psychological compulsions. Some investigators began to explore whether the victims may have had ties to criminal networks, which could complicate motives and suspects. But with so little forensic evidence and no confirmed cause of death for most victims, the case remained murky. Still, the theory of a serial killer gained traction. The media gave him a name that struck fear across the community: the Bone Collector. Despite rising pressure and numerous leads, the case hit a wall. In 2010, hoping to shake loose new information, the authorities offered a $100,000 reward for any tip leading to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible. Confidentiality for informants was guaranteed. Soon, several men drew the attention of police. The first suspect was Fred Reynolds, a known pimp who had close ties to one of the victims. Reports suggested Fred had photographs of her, placing him firmly on the radar. Investigators believed that, due to his connections in the sex trade, Fred might have crucial insight into the missing women. But before police could question him, Fred died suddenly of a stroke in January 2009. leaving behind more questions than answers. No usable evidence or photos were recovered from his belongings. The second person of interest was Lorenzo Montoya, a print shop worker who lived less than 3 miles from the burial site. Investigators noted dirt trails that connected his trailer home to the area where the bodies were found. Montoya had a history of violence. He once threatened to kill his girlfriend, telling her he would bury her in lime. Friends and co-workers later testified that he often joked about killing sex workers and burying them in the desert. In December 2006, Montoya strangled 19-year-old Sharika Hill Wright, a sex worker, inside his home. He was caught trying to load her body into his car's trunk and was fatally shot by the victim's boyfriend, while investigators suspected that Sharika wasn't his first victim. They lacked physical evidence linking him to the West Mesa killings. A disturbing camcorder tape found in his home added more suspicion. It allegedly showed Montoya with an unidentified woman. At one point, the footage cuts to the sound of duct tape tearing and a plastic bag being opened. Many believed it captured audio of him preparing to dispose of a body, but again, no direct forensic evidence tied him to the burial site. Then, in 2014, a new suspect emerged, Joseph Blee. Blee was already infamous in Albuquerque, dubbed the mid-school rapist. He had terrorized young girls in the 1980s by breaking into homes near McKinley Middle School. In later years, he was linked by DNA to the murder of a sex worker on Central Avenue. A search of his home yielded women's underwear and jewelry not belonging to his wife, items suspected to be trophies. Even more disturbing was a confession from a fellow inmate. The inmate claimed that Blee had admitted to hiring women, referring to the West Mesa victims in a degrading and hateful manner. That, combined with his record and collected evidence, made Blee one of the strongest suspects yet. In June 2015, he was sentenced to 36 years in prison for rape, but his alleged connection to the West Mesa murders remains unconfirmed. Meanwhile, a new theory emerged, one with international implications. Investigators began to consider the possibility that the West Mesa killings were tied to a criminal syndicate involved in drug trafficking, money laundering, and human trafficking. This theory suggested that the women were victims of a much larger operation, one backed by political influence and transnational criminal networks. Some leads pointed toward ties with Los Zetas, one of the most violent and powerful cartels in Latin America. In response, local and federal agencies, including the FBI and the Joint Forces, cybercrime experts were brought in to monitor encrypted communications, dark web chatter, and international transactions. Every avenue was pursued, yet, despite years of effort and public pressure, the West Mesa case remains unsolved. 11 women, one unborn child, no arrests, no justice. It remains one of the darkest mysteries in Albuquerque's history, a grim symbol of how easy it is for some lives to be erased, forgotten, or dismissed. Outro music swells, solemn strings and slow percussion. In our next episode, we'll explore the community impact of the West Mesa murders, how families fought for justice, how activists demanded accountability, and how the city still mourns what was lost, because behind every bone unearthed, was a name, was a life, was a story worth telling. Case 8, the pregnant victim of the Hongpu River despite mounting public pressure. The West Mesa case remained clouded by dead ends and vague leads. The lack of resolution stirred growing concern, not just about the investigation itself, but about the broader issues of public safety and investigative oversight. Then came Case 8, one of the most horrifying discoveries in recent memory. It was the autumn of 2010, during the height of the Shanghai World Expo. The city was buzzing with tourists and celebrations, but along the banks of the Hongpu River, near Dock Number 1, a grim sight stopped everything. Police tape flapped in the wind as a team of officers and forensic specialists gathered around a strange, tightly wrapped bundle retrieved from the water. It had been spotted by a group of sanitation workers tasked with clearing debris from the river at first. The workers assumed it was just rubbish, a tangled pile of cloth and trash drifting near the surface. But when they pulled it aboard, an overpowering stench hit them. Moments later, they glimpsed something pale between the folds. Skin. They immediately called the police. Within minutes, the area was sealed off. Forensics took over. What they unwrapped that day would haunt them for years. Inside the thick cloth was the mutilated torso of a woman, her head, arms, and legs missing. But the most disturbing detail wasn't the dismemberment. It was her abdomen, grotesquely swollen. The medical team at the scene quickly realized the truth. The victim had been pregnant, and very close to giving birth. She had been strangled too. Death, not drowned. The absence of water in her lungs confirmed it. The bruising around her neck, however, told the story of her final moments. During the autopsy, the team made a heartbreaking discovery. The fetus inside her was 9 months along, only days away from birth. A life that had nearly begun, extinguished before it ever had the chance. The challenge facing investigators was immense. With no head, they couldn't identify the victim, but the child inside her held the key. Forensic scientists extracted DNA from the fetus, hoping to match it to the father and, through him, trace the victim's identity and social circle. It was a long shot. Months passed, then a year, still no match. And then, just when the case seemed destined to fade into cold storage, a breakthrough. One morning, an alert flashed across the forensic database. The DNA of the fetus matched a new entry. A young man named Yang, arrested during a casino raid in Suzhou. A known gambling addict, Yang had been processed like any other detainee, printed, photographed, and submitted to the national database. That routine check linked him directly to the unborn child. Police brought Yang in for questioning. "Do you know a woman around 25, pregnant, nearly due?" the officer asked. Yang blinked, then shook his head. He insisted he knew no such person. A down-in-his-luck gambler with no job, no steady relationship, and a reputation for spending his nights in underground casinos. Yang claimed no woman had ever taken him seriously. His story checked out. Friends and family confirmed his lifestyle, aimless, broke, and alone, which raised a terrifying question. If Yang truly had no romantic relationships, how did the fetus inside the murdered woman carry his DNA? When confronted with the test results, Yang's demeanor changed entirely. He froze, his face went pale, his breath caught. He didn't speak, just stared at the evidence in disbelief. This wasn't the reaction of a practiced liar. It was the stunned panic of someone facing something too surreal to process. As investigators pushed, Yang grew erratic, fumbling over his words. His defenses began to crumble. The seasoned detectives in the room had seen this countless times, the point when denial gives way to reluctant truth. Finally, after hours of silence, Yang broke. More than a year ago, he admitted, he had visited Shanghai. During that time, he stayed at a small hotel for several nights. The woman, he said, was someone he barely knew, someone he met during his trip and only spent one night with. But he refused to give a name, claimed he didn't remember it. Detectives weren't convinced. The fact that he had fathered a child with this woman, who was later murdered and mutilated, placed him squarely in the center of the investigation. Whether he had committed the act himself or not, he was no longer just a gambling addict with bad luck. He was now the only living connection to a woman whose name, face, and voice had been erased. Investigators believed Yang was hiding something. What exactly had happened in that hotel room? What led to the woman's death? And most chilling of all was, she killed for her baby, or was her pregnancy simply another piece in a much larger, more sinister puzzle? With no name for the victim and no confession from the father, police were left with a haunting crime scene and a single undeniable fact. A mother and child were killed methodically, viciously, and discarded like trash in a river filled with tourists and celebration. The Shanghai pregnant woman case remains unsolved to this day. But one thing is certain. Someone out there knows exactly who she was, and someone out there knows why she died. Case 8. The pregnant victim of the Hongpu River Part 2. During questioning, Yang finally admitted that during his brief stay in Shanghai, he'd paid for a night with a woman to satisfy his personal needs. But when pressed for more information, he remained vague, offering no name, no descriptions. To him, it was just a fleeting encounter. The only detail he remembered: he had been introduced to her by a woman known only as Hong Ji. That name sparked immediate interest from the investigators. If they could find Hong Ji, they might be able to identify the victim. After digging through criminal databases, police discovered the truth. Hong Ji was no ordinary acquaintance. She was a well-known madam involved in prostitution, gambling, drug distribution, and a web of underground operations. She was already on the authorities' radar. Faced with intense police pressure, Hong Ji cracked. She admitted that back in May 2009, Yang had visited her not just seeking pleasure, but looking to make contact with a drug trafficker. His goal: to obtain methamphetamine. But at the time, the drug boss he wanted to meet had already been sentenced to death for narcotics offenses, and Hong Ji couldn't help him. Frustrated and bitter, Yang returned to his hotel in a foul mood. To lift his spirits, Hong Ji introduced him to a new girl in her network, young, quiet, new to the trade. Her name, she recalled, was Xiao Min. But like many in her world, she likely used a false identity. Hong Ji couldn't remember much else. Xiaomin hadn't been in the business long and kept her distance. That single thread was enough for investigators to act. Using big data, they pulled hotel records from May 2009, narrowing the list to women aged 20 to 30 whose names included the character Min, and cross-referenced each with photos. As soon as Hong Ji saw one image, she stopped. "That's her," she said, pointing. The woman's real name was Fan Min. Hong Ji added one final detail. The last time she saw Fan Min was in September 2009, and her pregnancy was already visible. Investigators tracked down Fan Min's hometown in Hainan province. There, they met her grieving parents, who revealed they hadn't heard from their daughter in over 2 years. DNA samples confirmed the devastating truth. The headless, mutilated body recovered from the Hong River was Fan Min. Now, the investigation turned to uncovering the story behind her death. Fan Min had left home after middle school, full of hope. She moved to Shanghai, searching for opportunity, but the city was unkind. Alone, unsupported, and surrounded by temptation, she eventually fell into sex work. Analyzing her final phone records, police found a frequent contact one number that stood out. It belonged to a man named Yu Mang, an employee at a major insurance company. When police confronted him at his workplace, his hands shook, sweat beaded at his temple. He panicked. Under pressure, he finally broke. Yu Mang confessed everything. He met Fan Min while leading a double life outwardly, a respectable family man with a wife and son. But inside his marriage, he felt hollow. Craving passion and attention, he began secretly pursuing other women. Fan Min was different, young, gentle. She wasn't just a fling, she became an escape. For a while, he felt alive again, but then, she got pregnant. What had been his secret pleasure turned into a looming threat. Fan Min began demanding that he take responsibility, and Yu Mang, terrified of losing his family, his job, his image, spiraled into paranoia. He felt trapped. On the night of January 11th, 2010, during a meeting in his apartment, the situation escalated. They argued, shouted, in a moment of panic. Yu Mang snapped. He lunged at Fan Min. He strangled her. When she stopped moving, silence filled the room, and in that silence, reality hit him. He had not only killed a woman, he had killed his own unborn child thought, but fear overruled remorse. Yu Mang didn't run. He didn't confess. Instead, he dismembered her body, slicing her apart with cold precision. He wrapped the pieces in cloths, sprinkled quicklime, and poured concrete to mask the smell. He dumped the parts in different sections of the Hongpu River, hoping her remains would never be identified. But fate had other plans. A cleaning crew, by sheer chance, pulled her torso from the river, sparking an investigation that would unravel his lies and ultimately destroy his carefully curated life. But the final twist was the cruelest of all. Yu Mang believed the baby was his. He killed Fan Min and the child to silence them both. But forensic tests told another story. The baby wasn't Yu Mang's. It was Yang's, the man who'd paid for one night with Fan Min in 2009, unaware that the brief encounter had led to a life that never got to take its first breath in the end. 3 lives were shattered. Yang, consumed by guilt and confusion over the child he never knew. Yu Mang, buried beneath the weight of regret and consequences. And Fan Min, a woman whose dream of a better life in the city turned into a final, fatal nightmare. Case 9. The murder of Private Vanessa Gillen, what first appeared to be a single body buried in a remote Kentucky forest quickly turned into something far more disturbing. Just steps away from the first grave, investigators discovered 2 additional sets of skeletal remains, all buried in a similar fashion. The spacing between the 3 bodies, just a few feet apart, suggested something far more sinister than a one-off crime. The evidence pointed to an organized pattern, not a random act. Forensic teams rushed to the scene, working under intense pressure. The remains were carefully excavated and transported to the military's forensic center for DNA testing and identification. Then came the devastating confirmation. One of the bodies belonged to Private Vanessa Gillen, a 20-year-old U.S. Army soldier who had gone missing from Fort Hood military base in Texas nearly 2 months earlier. Vanessa's disappearance on April 22, 2020, had sparked immediate concern. That day, she had been assigned to check inventory inside an armory warehouse. But after entering that building, she simply vanished. No one saw her leave. No one received a call or message. It was as if she had evaporated into thin air. By evening roll call, Vanessa's absence was impossible to ignore. She was known to be responsible, committed, and had never failed to report for duty. When military investigators arrived at the warehouse, all they found were her army ID and the keys to the building. Her phone, wallet, and other personal items were missing. Some officers speculated that she might have deserted, but her family rejected that idea immediately. Her mother insisted Vanessa wouldn't leave without telling us. If something was wrong, she'd find a way to reach out. As days turned to weeks, Vanessa's family launched a national campaign, holding vigils, press conferences, and demanding action. They begged the military to take her disappearance seriously. Then, in late June, the nightmare became real. The military officially confirmed that one of the mutilated bodies found in the Kentucky forest was Vanessa's. The shockwaves were immediate. How could something so horrific happen inside or just outside the largest military base in the United States? The autopsy offered grim details. Vanessa's body had been dismembered, but even more troubling were the forensic findings. Traces of semen suggested she may have been sexually assaulted before her death. This revelation shifted the investigation's focus. Authorities turned their attention inward, probing Fort Hood itself. But accessing information inside a military installation wasn't easy. Investigators were met with resistance, strict protocols, red tape, and a pervasive wall of silence. Personnel records, surveillance footage, and internal logs were difficult to access, and cooperation was limited. Then, a critical clue emerged from Vanessa's own family. They revealed that 3 months prior to her disappearance, Vanessa had confided in them. She was being sexually harassed by 2 male officers on base. The family had kept this information to themselves, fearing backlash and wanting to protect Vanessa's image in a male-dominated environment. But with her murder now confirmed, they had no choice but to speak out. This revelation was explosive. Sexual harassment in the military, especially at a base as high-profile as Fort Hood, was supposed to be strictly prohibited. And yet, here was evidence that Vanessa had been suffering in silence. Investigators acted fast. With a new warrant in hand, they scoured the base more aggressively. Then came another breakthrough. An internal source confirmed that on the day of her disappearance, Vanessa had been sent to the warehouse to verify serial numbers on weapons. While doing so, she had interacted with a fellow soldier, Specialist Aaron Robinson. Robinson was the last known person to see Vanessa alive. What stood out most? He was missing from all surveillance footage in the area that day, especially strange, given that the Fort Hood cameras ran 24/7 and covered the exact location where Vanessa had been assigned. As suspicion mounted, an unexpected witness came forward, Cecily Aguilar, a civilian woman with a romantic relationship with Robinson. She agreed to speak with investigators, and what she shared was horrifying. According to Aguilar, Robinson and Vanessa had gotten into an argument at the warehouse. Robinson had grown jealous, suspecting Vanessa of having a relationship with another soldier. Enraged and unstable, he attacked her in a fit of rage. Vanessa fought back, but Robinson overpowered her. In his fury, he bludgeoned her to death with a hammer. But it didn't end there. In a desperate bid to cover up his crime, Robinson enlisted Aguilar's help. The two of them drove Vanessa's body off base, where they dismembered her remains with a machete and tried to burn them in a shallow grave near the Lion River in Kentucky. They then poured concrete and quicklime over the remains to delay decomposition and mask the odor. Their plan might have worked if not for the witness who reported a foul smell in the forest, and another who had seen someone burying something suspicious. In a final twist of fate, just as police closed in, Robinson escaped from custody and fled. As authorities tracked him down and closed the perimeter, he pulled out a weapon and took his own life before he could be arrested. Justice, in the courtroom sense, would never come. But Cecily Aguilar was arrested and later charged with tampering with evidence and conspiracy. She would become the only person held accountable in what would become one of the most devastating scandals in modern U.S. military history. Vanessa Guillen's murder exposed the deep, systemic failures inside the military, the silence around harassment, the culture of intimidation, and the lack of safeguards for women in uniform. Her death galvanized a movement across the country. Thousands demanded reform. The hashtag #ZeneHall, I am Vanessa Guillen, exploded on social media. Survivors of harassment and abuse began to share their stories. Investigations were opened. Policies were questioned. Congressional hearings followed. Vanessa didn't survive, but her story wouldn't be buried. Her name, Vanessa Guillen, would be etched into the collective conscience of a nation.